Now, since the courts are no longer independent and their salaries are taxed by the executive branch, the courts are but a mere extension of executive power, like I've already pointed out. Hence, I thought it essential to show that the judiciary is merely an extension of executive power. Ironically, in 1933, just 6 years prior to the O'Malley decision, the Supreme Court, in the case of O'Donohue versus U.S., upheld that judges shall receive their salary undiminished. Let's look at this. Purpose of separation of powers was to preclude commingling of essentially different governmental powers in the same hands, so that each department might, within its proper sphere, act with entire independence. Constitutional provisions against diminution of compensation of federal judges was designed to secure independence of the judiciary. And here's a quote from the case that I thought was pertinent. Chief Justice Marshall, in the course of the debates of the Virginia State Convention of 1829-30, used the following strong and frequently quoted language. The judicial department comes home in its effects to every man's fireside. It passes on his property, his reputation, his life, his all. Is it not to the least degree important that he should be rendered perfectly and completely independent, with nothing to influence or control him but God and his conscience? I have always thought, from my earliest youth till now, that the greatest scourge an angry heaven ever inflicted upon an ungrateful and sinning people was an ignorant, a corrupt, or a dependent judiciary. In a very early period of our history, it was said, in words as true today as they were then, that if they, speaking of the people, value and wish to preserve their constitution, they ought never to surrender the independence of their judges. Well, you've surrendered the independence of your judges, people. Franklin Roosevelt, in his famous horse and buggy days press conference in 1935, after the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the Congress cannot surrender their legislative powers to the executive, criticized Justice Marshall for pulling the wool over the people's eyes, that the Supreme Court could declare an act of Congress unconstitutional. Well, this was a lie, folks. Let's see what Alexander Hamilton said in the Federalist number 78. The complete independence of the courts of justice is peculiarly essential in a limited constitution. By a limited constitution, I understand one which contains certain specified exceptions to the legislative authority, such, for instance, as that it shall pass no bills of attainder, no ex post facto laws, and the like. Limitations of this kind can be preserved and practiced no other way than through the medium of the courts of justice, whose duty it must be to declare all acts contrary to the manifest tenor of the Constitution void. Without this, all the reservations of particular rights or privileges would amount to nothing. So we can see it was the founding fathers who took the position that the courts would be able to declare acts of Congress void if those acts violated the Constitution. Prior to the New Deal, by the way, only about 1/4 of 1% of laws passed by Congress were declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And now Franklin Roosevelt was viciously attacking the independence of the courts. But back then, FDR was looked up to by many people as if he were some sort of a god. John Marshall, the second Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, was the man that was entrusted with George Washington's private books and papers after Washington died. Washington left these papers to his son Bushrod, and Bushrod in turn let Marshall use them to write the 5-volume set of the Life of Washington. Why isn't the Life of Washington, for example, part of our children's education in school, or for that matter, the complete works of Lincoln? I wonder why. Anyway, our old friend George Washington, who's still on the quarter and the dollar bill, said this in his farewell address to the American people in 1796. All obstructions to the execution of the laws, all combinations and associations under whatever plausible character, with the real design to direct, control, counteract, or awe the regular deliberations and action of the constituted authorities, are destructive of this fundamental principle and a fatal tendency. They serve to organize faction, to give it an artificial and extraordinary force, to put in the place of the delegated will of the nation the will of party, often a small but artful and enterprising minority of the community, and according to the alternate triumphs of different parties, to make the public administration the mirror of the ill-concerted and incongruous projects of faction, rather than the organ of consistent and wholesome plans digested by common councils and modified by mutual interests. However combinations or associations of the above descriptions may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which has lifted them to unjust dominion. You see, George Washington was unique as far as presidents were concerned. Yeah, he wasn't a member of any political party, and he knew how dangerous blind faith in a political party could be. See what else he had to say. I have already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular references to the founding them on geographical discriminations. Let us now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed, but in those of the popular form it is seen in its greatest rankness and is truly their worst enemy. The alternate dominion of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, and is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. Let's read some more of what George had to say. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation, for though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The President must always greatly overbalance in permanent evil any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield. See, Herbert Hoover also warned the people about allowing the government to expand its powers without amending the Constitution. Guess what he said? It is not my purpose to discuss the constitutionality of the many measures and acts upon which national regimentation has been based. Whatever that situation may be, to adhere to the spirit of the Constitution and its safeguards, including orderly amendment, is the shelter of American life. To move away from these safeguards endangers the whole future and philosophy of liberty, and thus the whole future of America. On that road, one misstep leads to another, and another, and then another, until primary liberties are gone. Yeah, your right to free labor is gone, people. When Herbert Hoover wrote this in 1934, the right to free labor still existed, and less than 3% of the people paid income tax. Today, the right to free labor, which bought by the blood of the Civil War and the 13th Amendment. It's gone. And the politicians that rule over us today, they have no intention of giving it back any more than the slaveholders did. The judicial branch of government is not an independent branch of government that's there to protect the people's liberty from unconstitutional laws. Let's move on. Let's go to Article 4. Article 4. Section 1. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, and the executive bureaucracy in Congress may by general laws prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved and the effect thereof. Section 2. The serfs of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of serfs in the several states. No serf held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping to another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Anyway, folks, just another reminder that Congress is a rubber stamp for executive legislation. Also, I use the word serf to replace citizen. I chose this because we were warned back in the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, that the progression of the socialist policy of the New Deal would lead the people back into servitude to the state. Before income taxation began taxing the wages of American workers, Herbert Hoover in 1934 said, "One may disagree and keep silent as to the justification of some of these measures if they are to be limited to emergency. For in the march of a great people, that is relatively unimportant if that is all of it. Then these dangers and stresses will disappear as an eddy in the stream of national life. The important thing is whether this drift from essential liberties is to be permanent. If not permanent, these emergency measures will have served the purpose of having exhausted the pent-up panaceas of a generation and broken them on the wheel of resistant human behavior in the spirit of a people with a heritage of liberty. The threat of the continuance of these emergency acts is a threat to join the continental retreat of human progress backward through the long corridor of time. In the demands for continuance there lies a mixture of desperate seeking for justification of their adoption and subtle ambitions of those advocating other philosophies. Whatever the motive, the promise of permanence now stares the American people starkly in the face. It is not the mere evolution of an economic procedure that this regimentation implies. It steps off the solid highways of true American liberty into the dangerous quicksands of governmental dictation. In 1944, an Austrian and British economist named Friedrich Hayek published a book called The Road to Serfdom. The book opens by saying, "To the socialists of all parties." Hayek saw how gradual socialism in Germany eventually resulted in a national socialist state with Hitler and the Nazis. He was concerned that a similar process of gradual socialism would produce similar results in America and England, since the ruling parties were embracing a socialist way of thinking. Such a system results in reducing the people to serfs to the government, like Herbert Hoover warned in 1934 again. The man on horseback, ascending triumphantly to office on the steps of constitutional process, demands and threatens the Parliament into the delegation of its sacred powers. Then follows consolidation of authority through powerful propaganda in the pay of the state to transform the mentality of the people. Resentment of criticism, denunciation of all opposition, moral terrorization, all follow in sequence. The last scene is a suppression of freedom. Liberty dies of the water from her own well. Free speech poisoned by untruth. In the epilogue, the dreams of those who saw utopia are shattered, and the people find they are marching backwards towards the Middle Ages as regimented men. Okay, let's move on to Article 4. Article 4. And we'll just concern ourselves with sections 3 and 4 here. New states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but a new federal state may be formed by the junction of all the states and territories by the executive bureaucracy in Congress enacting laws which govern the states and territories using federal law. Doesn't that sound nice? The Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this perverted Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or any particular state. Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a collectivist form of government, and shall protect each of them from invasion, and on application of the legislature or of the executive, when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. Okay, Section 3 of Article 4 allowed states to be admitted into the Union, but also had a provision to prevent the federal government from creating an empire. And you see what they've done, they perverted the Commerce Clause. See, at one time, when something was involved in interstate commerce, when it got to where it's going, that's when the commerce stopped. Well, now they take the position with this New Deal way of thinking, this socialist way of thinking, that all something has to do is affect commerce and it can be regulated. Well, hell, let's just take diapers, for example. Go to the store and buy some diapers. Well, I guarantee you them diapers went across state lines to get to the store. And now you bring them diapers home, you're handling them diapers. Those diapers have been involved in interstate commerce. Well, by that logic, they can write laws about how you're supposed to change your baby's diaper. You see what they've done? Anyway, since our form of government now is democratic socialism and not a constitutional republic, I changed Republican to collectivist. We're all part of the collective. Yeah. Our labor has been nationalized and our children are born into servitude by being assigned taxpayer identification numbers at birth. This is the resurrection of the slave maxim, partus sequitur ventrum, where children follow the servile condition of their mothers. On April 6, 1864, Senator James Harlan opened the debates on that day on the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. He said, "According to our ideas of justice, it would be wrong to punish a child for the crimes of his father. It would be very cruel to visit on the offspring the misfortune of the parent. We are told by the divine writer that the saying should no longer be maintained in Israel that the fathers have eaten sour grapes and that the children's teeth are set on edge. Whence then the origin of the slaveholder's title to the services of the slave's children? Here is the only answer that can be given. Partus sequitur ventrum. This is the whole title, the title deed. The offspring follows the condition of the mother." Like I said earlier, folks, your Social Security number is the government's title deed to your labor, and this number is assigned to children at birth. Now let's look at the amendments. We're hanging on to the First and Second Amendments. I'm sure a lot of people can see, too, the 10th Amendment has been violated by the federal government, infringing on state sovereignty. But anyway, let's look at the 16th. What does the 16th Amendment say? Well, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. Now, how is it today? The executive bureaucracy in Congress shall have a taxing power that is unlimited. You get that? The executive bureaucracy in Congress shall have a taxing power that is unlimited. Really, if there are any limits to their taxing powers, tell me. What are they? Think about it. Amendment 13 has been repealed, except that chattel slavery shall not exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Yeah, they're not going to allow chattel slavery anymore, but they'll just feast upon your labor cannibalism. Anyway, folks, think about it. What are the limits to the powers of taxation anymore? When the government can tax the very foundation of property, your labor, that's it. The socialists have achieved their goal of an unlimited taxing power without amending the Constitution. This is a tremendous theft of the people's labor and their liberty. But if most of the people don't care about it, then the socialist bureaucracy wins by default. Indifference and apathy results in default judgment in favor of the masters. We cannot turn back time and change what Franklin Roosevelt and the socialism of the New Deal did. We're the ones today who must deal with the mess they left us. We will either restore our liberty, or we will allow democratic socialism to continue and lead us down a path of increasing servitude. One leads to equality in freedom and liberty. The other leads to equality in restraint and servitude. Choose we must, for there's no escaping it. Anyway, we shouldn't be surprised that the politicians have achieved power over our labor again. It's been a struggle that's existed throughout the history of the human race. Abraham Lincoln, when he was debating Senator Douglas in Alton, Illinois, on October 15, 1858, said, "You may turn over everything in the Democratic policy from beginning to end, whether in the shape it takes on the statute book, in the shape it takes in the Dred Scott decision, in the shape it takes in conversation, or in the shape it takes in short maxim-like arguments. It everywhere carefully excludes the idea there is anything wrong in it." Yeah, slavery. You work and toil and earn bread and I'll eat it. That is the issue. That is the real issue. That is the issue that will continue in this country when these poor tongues of Judge Douglas and myself shall be silent. It is the eternal struggle between these two principles, right and wrong, throughout the world. They are the two principles that have stood face to face from the beginning of time and will ever continue to struggle. The one is the common right of humanity, and the other the divine right of kings. It is the same principle in whatever shape it develops itself. It is the same spirit that says, "You toil and work and earn bread, and I'll eat it," no matter in what shape it comes, whether from the mouth of a king who seeks to bestride the people of his own nation and live by the fruit of their labor, or from one race of men as an apology for enslaving another race. It is the same tyrannical principle. Franklin Roosevelt knew the risk he was taking by handing power over the people's labor to an executive bureaucracy. A historical fact we're not taught in school is that the extension of executive and bureaucratic power over the lives of the American people during the first 3 years of Roosevelt's presidency is such as never occurred before in the world in time of peace without violence. And in his annual message to Congress in 1936, which was the last year the right to free labor existed in America, Roosevelt said this concerning this massive new executive power that he created in violation of the Constitution. He said, "In the hands of a people's government, this power is wholesome and proper, but in the hands of political puppets of an economic autocracy, such power would provide shackles for the liberties of the people." Yeah, he knew that this power in the wrong hands could be perverted to enslave the people. The truth is, there is no power vested in the Constitution that allows the government to tax and garnish your wages unless the due process of the 13th Amendment is respected first. This means all the money that's been taken from your wages, your whole working life, is a theft. The legal and historical research I've done proves that there's an institution of slavery functioning in this country right under your noses, and propaganda has been used to blind you to its existence. We've been made ignorant of the law and our rights on purpose. At one time in our history, you could order home study law courses and study the law at home. Now you must pay thousands and thousands of dollars to be brainwashed by socialist, labor cannibal law professors before you can practice law. So now it's up to the people to either overthrow this perverted system or bow down to it and become slaves by choice. In my next video, I'll outline the remedy to all of this. Today, there is no political party that stands in opposition to this new slave power. So I propose, just like in years preceding the Civil War, to form a new political party that people can join that is committed to restoring our liberty, the Free Labor Party. I chose this name because the very core of what the party stands for is in the name itself. We must enforce the 13th Amendment and restore the right to free labor, or what's left of our Constitution will be destroyed by socialist cancer. May God bless all of you in your struggle to defend the truth and restore liberty.